Greetings, class of 2024. Welcome to the session on the history of the United States Coast Guard Academy. The Academy is going to be your alma mater. And for the next 4 years, it's going to be your home. So you should know something about it, why it looks the way it does, why it is where it is. And maybe from some of those questions and some of those answers, you'll glean where it may be going. My name is Richard Zuczek. I'm the head of the Department of Humanities. I'm the senior permanent historian here, and I'm going to be your guide through this PowerPoint for the next 20 or 30 minutes. You'll see in front of you there are several sections to this PowerPoint. Bear with us. We'll go through it together. 5 sections of growth, 5 sections of change. I'm hoping you also saw the U.S. Coast Guard Academy's brief history, which we just finished a little while ago in 2020. That, used in conjunction with this PowerPoint, will tell you just about everything you need to know about the Academy. Fair enough? Good. On the next slide, which you can move to whenever you want, you will see a slide within a slide. That is an audio written slide. I hope it works. Hello folks, class of 2024. This is Dr. Richard Zuczek again. In front of you, you should see a map of the base. It's not a current map of the base. Dates from about 2017 or so. You can see that it's after 2016 because there is a particular couple of little signs on it. For instance, this little building right here. That is the Alumni Center. It is a private building owned and operated by the alumni that was not there until 2015. And you'll also see, if I can find my little pointer here, this smokestack. Your Academy does not have it. We knocked it down last year when we went to a multi-million-dollar project for natural gas. That smokestack came down. This is your new home. For most of you, it's going to be your home for the next 4 years. United States Coast Guard Academy, New London, Connecticut. Today we're going to take a tour, virtual tour, and I'm going to be your guide. Sounds like Rod Serling from the old never mind, I'm dating myself here. Not Rod Serling, but I might sound like him. The map in front of you we're going to use now so that you get a sense of how we're moving and where we're going. The base itself, okay, is really 3 different chunks. The original area, which we call the core, is this area here, built in 1931-1932, when the Academy moved from Fort Trumbull. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. That's not where we're going to start. We're actually going to start our little tour up here on the hill. Although the buildings on the hill, superintendent's home, etc., were part of the original purchase, the rest of this land was purchased in the 1950s, including the chapel and Crown Park. That's where we're going to begin our tour. We're going to begin our tour up there, and then we're going to proceed north. Right? This is the sort of east-south part. We're going to proceed down Seneca Drive, stop here and look at this building, which is Satterlee, this road, which is Tampa. We'll proceed north down Bear, have a look at Hamilton Hall, zip through Hamilton Hall, come out onto Campbell Drive, again head north between McAllister, right here, your engineering building, and your new house, Chase Hall, down past Michael, the clinic, to the longest road at the Academy, which is Harriet Lane. Harriet Lane sits alongside Leamy Hall here, and this is, of course, where Bear Plaza is, which we'll talk about in a second. From there, we'll proceed further north. which will take us to sort of the third area of expansion, this area down here. All of this is added in the 1970s when the Coast Guard joined as a core component the Department of Transportation. So from there, oops, still have my eraser. We will look a little bit at Munro Hall, walk up virtually, kind of, walk up Hunter Liggett, and sort of end around here someplace in the 70s expansion. This, of course, is Weishi Hall, library, admissions, the museum. And then down here we have Dimmick Auditorium, and this is Smith for those of you studying science. Fair enough? Everybody clear? All right, bear with me as we move forward. Hi folks. All right, so I hope that worked. It took me a long time to put together. I hope it actually worked as planned. We will see. All right, something a little simpler here. Just sort of a general introduction to why, the why of the Academy. The Revenue Cutter Service, as you know, founded in 1790 under the Tariff Act, drew its officers from other services. Drew its officers from merchant marine, from private industry, commercial fishermen, Coast Guard, what am I saying? U.S. Navy, a bunch of other places. But it didn't have its own trained cadre, people who could balance military missions, law enforcement missions, life-saving missions. So by the 1840s, some of the COs basically started using their ships to help train new people. On the slide, you'll see that Captain Fraser is one of the most famous. He turned his cutter into a training ship. But that was very ad hoc. That was very informal. It really wasn't until after the Civil War that the U.S. government realized it needed a training ground for officers. It needed some way to prepare people for the unique job of the Revenue Cutter Service. The man who pulled all of this off is a fellow by the name of Sumner Increase Kimball. We have a security cutter named for him because he's a pivotal player in Coast Guard history. As the head of the Revenue Marine, he's the guy that is able to use management techniques, numbers, business contacts, all kinds of data to show the need for a training school. And in 1876, he convinced the Department of the Treasury and the U.S. Congress to start such a school. It was unconventional at first. The school existed only on a ship. There was no seaside or shoreside school. The first training ship was the Dobbin, and that is why its CO, John Henriques, is considered the first superintendent of the United States Coast Guard Academy. The key, Sumner Kimball believed, the key was creating an entry system based on merit only. By this time, the Naval Academy had been open for about 2 decades, and of course the U.S. Military Academy opened in 1803. But he didn't like the fact that Congress had a role in who was sent there. Too many kids who had no future, too many connections, too many strings attached, etc., etc. He wanted a system based purely on merit. That, boys and girls, is why we are the only federal military academy that does not have congressional appointments. Sumner Kimball figured that out a long time ago. Next slide. For those of you interested in historical photography, here's a couple of shots of your home before it was a seaside sort of place, or a shoreside sort of place. A shot of the Dobbin in the upper left, and then in the upper right a shot of the Revenue Cutter Chase. Revenue Cutter Chase was named for Secretary of the Treasury Solomon Portland Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury during the Civil War. Brilliant financier who basically paid for the Civil War, figured out how to pay for the Civil War. the chase was designed specifically for use as a training ship. Right? You may recognize that name, right? Chase Hall. Chase Hall isn't simply named Chase Hall because it was a Treasury secretary. Chase Hall is your home. It's your training area. It's where you eat. It's your wardroom, just like the revenue cutter Chase was. Down on the bottom, we get a picture of Sumner Kimball. Pretty cool guy, neat mustache. And then we have one of our graduating classes, rather small, yes, over on the right. All right, fair enough. Move on. From 1876 with the Dobbin until about 1910, most training and most schooling, both, occurred aboard ship. Now, the Chase would pull into New Bedford, Massachusetts for winters, and there would be some language training, mathematics, writing, composition, rhetoric, things like this, Latin, but it was still taught on the ship. Basically, the school was always on the ship, whether the ship was tied up or not. By the early 20th century, the revenue cutter service had grown in missions. The United States had grown. It was now an empire after the Spanish-American War. Immigration had increased, a lot of the stuff you studied in history. So the revenue cutter service needed more officers who could do more things. That really led the Treasury Department to think about some sort of shoreside establishment where training could take place on the ship and on shore. So the first sort of semi-permanent home was in Maryland, in Curtis Bay, Maryland, at Arundel Cove. See a couple of pictures there on the screen, some drill, if you want to call it that, at Arundel Cove, up on the upper right. And from a period of about 1900 through about 1911, Arundel Cove was this shoreside facility. It wasn't much, believe me, but it was something. And then around 1910, 1911, Treasury Department started looking for a bigger home and a better home. Someplace with larger barracks, someplace with more established buildings rather than just huts and the such. And ended up buying from the U.S. Army an abandoned fort up in New London, Connecticut, a place called Fort Trumbull. Okay? You can see a picture of that from on the slide on the lower right. About that same time, the Chase was retired. The revenue cutter Itasca became the training ship. The Corps grew. The sports grew. And a whole different line of academics started coming in. You started seeing a lot more science, a lot more mathematics, and a lot more engineering as we entered the 20th century. Some things that probably look familiar. These are shots from the Revenue Cutter School of Instruction while it was at Fort Trumbull. On the left you see a triple barracks room. Pretty Spartan, pretty plain. I have some notes on the slide you can read later. Pay particular attention to the window. I like the window. You can see a rope near the windowsill. That's an emergency rope for getting out if there's a fire or something like that. The room kind of looks like an infirmary, doesn't it? Like maybe a prison cell or some sort of medical room. No, that's a barracks room. The center picture is a drill shot. I really like that shot, although it's a little sepia toned. I really like that shot because you can see how little has changed in a century. In the middle of that shot, you see somebody in a suit trooping the line. You see the regimental commander out in front. You see the various staff behind. And then against the back wall of the Trumbull Barracks, or against the wall of the Trumbull Barracks, you can actually see a whole bunch of spectators, right? Watching drill, very much like we do here on Washington Parade Field on Friday afternoon. And then, of course, up on the right, we have OBG. Nickname OBG, full name Objectionable Presence. It is at Fort Trumbull where OBG became a thing. Cadet Stephen Evans, in 1926, smuggled a small bear supposedly onto his cutter after a training cruise up in Alaska, brought it to the academy, and somehow convinced people, anyone and everyone, that this should be the mascot. It made some sense because, of course, by 1926, everyone in the Revenue Cutter Service, which became the Coast Guard in 1915, so now the Coast Guard, understood the bear. The bear is and will probably always be the most famous ship in Coast Guard history. Its exploits, its leadership, its adventures are amazing. So to have a bear, cutter bear, okay, kind of made sense for a while. Okay, time to move. Curtis Bay was okay. Trumbull was a little bit better. But by the late 1930s, the Coast Guard became the Coast Guard in 1915, was being asked to do more and more and more. 1912, of course, we have the creation of the International Ice Patrol after the loss of the Titanic. 1917, the United States enters the First World War. And then by 1920, the United States enters Prohibition under the Volstead Act. That fell, enforcement of that fell to the Treasury Department, which means a lot of it fell to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard had a lot more missions, needed a lot more training, and needed a lot more officers. The idea for a permanent home comes in the head of the superintendent, Frederick Billard, pictured on the screen here. Frederick Billard was superintendent and then later became commandant. And so he had the big picture, and he also understood what the school needed. Even better, his wife knew what the school needed. Her name was Clara Prentice. She's a native of New London. So with her ties to New London and his ties to the Coast Guard, they ended up swinging a deal. And with Congress's assistance, bought a tract of land along the Thames River from the city of New London. In 1931, the head of the Treasury Department, Secretary of Treasury Mellon, he and his entourage showed up. They broke ground for the United States Coast Guard Academy. The cornerstone is disputed. There's a central block under the front steps of Hamilton, you can see. And then if you go to the north around those steps by the breezeway to Chase, there's also an inscribed cornerstone, supposedly laid by Mellon on that day in 1931. Construction began soon after for the United States Coast Guard Academy, and it took a year. That was it. Remember, this is the Great Depression. Materials and people were cheap and plentiful. So the core of the academy, the main central buildings of the academy, were ready within a year. September 1932, classes began. This is a pretty cool picture. It has, for me, historical value, sentimental value. Not really sure why I have it in this class because it's kind of a waste of time. This is after the groundbreaking, this is the laying of the foundations of the big three, right? The first three buildings built, Satterlee, Hamilton, and Chase. Satterlee was not called Satterlee at the time, it was simply called Academic Building, Hamilton and Chase Hall. I've circled in red a truck so you can see a sense of some of those giffing scaffolds. This was quite an operation. These buildings were built to last. That is some serious construction going on. All right, moving forward. Just pause on that slide as long as you want, or you can move to the next one. Thank you very much. To give some sense of dramatic development, you can go to the last slide, which showed some of the early construction. This is a shot of Satterlee Hall in the summer of 1932. Remember, classes began in September of 32. pretty cool shot. We don't have the trees planted yet. There's no parade field yet. But further down north, you can see the breezeway connecting it to Hamilton Hall. And then you're welcome to zoom in and check out some classic cars from the late 20s. Pretty cool stuff. Well, I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's actually start the tour. The rest is sort of background. Let's start at the highest point in New London. That is Cadet Memorial Chapel. Not an original building, like I said. It was added later along with Crown Park in the 1950s. This is the first building to be built by donated money, by donated and gift funds, not government expenditures. Kind of cool. All of you know the Morse code, alpha light. It shines day and night from the top. You can't really see it during the day, but it is on during the day. It is a military chapel, therefore non-denominational. It has some beautiful stuff outside and some beautiful stuff inside. We'll step inside on the next slide. But there's also a link on this slide if you want. When a local newspaper wanted to do sort of a deep dive into what's it really like in the chapel. So either at the instructor's discretion or on your own time, feel free to click on that link, and it leads you to a couple-minute video where somebody's sort of snooping around inside the chapel. The chapel sits on the end of Seneca Drive, and what you'll see as we take the next couple of steps through the base, you'll see that there are three cutters that share a common history. The hill and the chapel is Seneca Drive. The main road leading into the base is Tampa, and that intersects behind Satterlee with Campbell. And all of those were part of the North Atlantic squadron that escorted ships in World War I. Remember that the base is being built during the Great Depression. Second World War hasn't happened yet. So a lot of the original features, like the roads, for instance, are named after World War I events and World War I actors. Make sense? All right, next slide. We are now inside the Cadet Memorial Chapel. I cannot possibly do justice to the chapel, not with the time you and I have here, but I encourage everyone to visit the chapel. There are some beautiful relics, some gorgeous mementos, and some really, really sad stories. A few of them I have on this slide here. Let me tell you one little story. It'll take a little bit of time, and that is the lower right-hand plaque, the Leopold. For generations, it was understood that the Leopold was sunk during the war by a German submarine. We now know that it was not. It was actually sunk by friendly fire. Very, very tragic. If you ever want to read a moving story, the book is called Never to Return. The book is based on tape recordings from one of the survivors. Tape recordings that were done by an 8th grader doing a project for history. This story is amazing because in a little play recorder, one of those little play school recorders, she taped the story of the sinking and forgot about it. And years later, her father was cleaning out the house and found the tapes and listened to it. And the book resulted from that. An amazing story within an amazing story. Next slide, please. Outside the chapel is Robert Crown Park, which you won't spend a lot of time there, unfortunately. Sometimes you'll have class up there. We hold receptions up there. When the weather's nice, it's a cool place to go up and hide. The park has a small gazebo, a fountain that may or may not run. It also holds several obelisks and memorials to United States Coast Guard service in America's military conflicts, including one remembering Pearl Harbor, one recognizing all Coast Guard sacrifices, one recognizing the Coast Guard in Viet Nam. It's a fascinating, sad, and eye-opening environment to be in. If you ever have time to go up and sort of wander around, you get a real sense of the Coast Guard as a military organization when you see that the Coast Guard was involved in every military conflict in American history. Outside the chapel, as most of you probably know, is the tomb of Hopley Yeaton, the first commissioned maritime officer of the United States. Hopley Yeaton was buried in Lubbock, Maine, but in the early 1970s, commercial expansion threatened the cemetery where he was, and the United States Coast Guard and then the Department of Transportation went forward and got permission to remove his remains and reinter them at the Coast Guard Academy. He was disinterred in 1974. He laid in state up there through the winter of 1974. And then in 1975, the Eagle, with its summer cadets, went up, received the remains of Hopley Yeaton, put them aboard Eagle, brought them back to the Academy. This is a beautiful shot from 1975 showing the entourage, full military honors, bringing Hopley Yeaton's body back up what used to be called Eagle Pier to the Academy for reinterment. Here we see cadets heading up one of those trails to Robert Crown Park, to the chapel. You can see the chapel on the right there, right side of the screen, preparing for the ceremony to reinter the remains of Hopley Yeaton. And most of you will probably recognize this. This is the actual tomb of Hopley Yeaton. This is where he now lays to rest. Lots of different stories. You'll hear them, if you haven't heard them yet, about this myth and that tradition, etc., etc. Do me a favor, don't deface the tomb. Don't do anything unwarranted to the tomb. Don't go sharpening your compass on the tomb. Just respect the tomb for what it is. Okay, the final resting place of the first commissioned officer of the Revenue Cutter Service and the Maritime Services of the United States. As we head down Seneca Drive, we come to the gatehouse, the main gate entrance. This was the only gate entrance for decades and decades at the Academy until the expansion occurred. This is Tampa Drive. This is what connects Greater New London to the Academy, and the building on the left, the first building you pass, is Satterlee Hall, home to the Mathematics Department, the Management Department, and the Humanities Department. Okay? Once again, I'll remind you, this should see connections not just with greater history, but connections with the physicality of the base. These folks knew what they were doing. Okay? This road, Tampa, and the road that connects to it, Seneca, were both World War I escort cutters. The building you're looking at, Satterlee Hall, is named for Captain Charles Satterlee. Captain Satterlee was the CO of the Tampa. Makes sense, right? Captain Satterlee, the Tampa, and all hands went down in the First World War. His ship, returning from escort duty, was torpedoed off the coast of England, actually, I think, or Ireland, and went down with all hands September 1918. If you go into Satterlee Hall, the main deck, you will see some mementos to him and some archive cases. And if you go up outside my office on the second deck, north wing, his Purple Heart and some other mementos to him and his crew sit there in a small display case. We're standing on Bear Drive, so Satterlee Hall is to our immediate right. We are looking north toward Hamilton Hall. This is Bear Drive, the second longest road on the base. It is named for the most famous cutter in Coast Guard history, the Bear. Okay. The Bear was built in Scotland as a high north fishing vessel. Had reinforced timber wood hull, and it served briefly as a fishing vessel, and then the United States purchased it. It served in U.S. service from the 1880s until the 1940s. Sadly, it was lost as it was being transported off the New England coast, and expeditions still look for it. We've never found the Bear. The Bear took part in the famous Overland Expedition of 1898 to trap whalers whose ships were encased in the ice up off northern Alaska. And its CO remains one of the most charismatic and controversial characters in Coast Guard history. That is, of course, Roaring Mike Healy. The icebreaker Healy is named for him. He was CEO of the Bear in the late 1870s, early 1880s. It is Mike Healy that used the Bear to transport reindeer from Russia over to Alaska to help the natives survive because their food was being depleted. Up here down Bear Drive, you'll see I have circled a couple of guns. There are several of them along Bear Drive. Let's go to the next slide and see. As I said earlier, up at Crown Park, the United States Coast Guard and its ancestor services have participated in every military conflict in American history. These are from the Spanish-American War. The United States Coast Guard participated in several parts of that war, off Cuba, off Puerto Rico, and most importantly, off the Philippines. The cutter McCulloch was with the United States Navy at the time when Dewey sunk the entire Spanish fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay. Due to the service of the McCulloch and various other then called revenue cutter personnel, the Admiral Dewey presented these guns to the United States Coast Guard and the McCulloch. The plaque reads there from the Reina Cristina, which was actually the Spanish flagship, to the cutter McCulloch. The McCulloch was a cutter named after another Secretary of the Treasury. Remember, revenue cutter service is in the Treasury. He was Secretary of the Treasury right after the American Civil War. He followed Chase, actually. Salmon Chase was during the war. Hugh McCulloch was right after the war. There is a road named for him on the base, which you guys never notice, but it's there. When you come outside of Chase and face Michael Hall, that little drop that takes you down to Harriet Lane is actually McCulloch Road. It's about, 60 yards long? All right, moving on. As I said a few minutes ago, the Spanish-American war guns sit outside Hamilton Hall. They're both to the north of Hamilton Hall and to the south of Hamilton Hall. This is Hamilton Hall. This is the bridge, right? This is the front office. This is where the leadership resides. It was the first building finished, named for Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, and a brilliant financier who realized that the United States government needed money badly. And you couldn't tax Americans because we just fought a revolutionary war against taxes. How do you raise money without taxes? And it was Hamilton who crafted the Tariff Act. First one in 1789 and then another in 1790. And that created the system of cutters to enforce tariff to raise money. The United States government didn't have a lot of money. It didn't tax people. It really floated on the back of the revenue cutter service and tariffs. So this building is named for him. It's also, of course, named for the cutter Hamilton, which was the training ship in the 20th century that cadets used on their summer cruises. The mast outside is a replica of the mast from the cutter Hamilton. There you go. Originally, it housed the superintendent, the finance offices, and the library. The Henriques Room in Hamilton Hall is the original library. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now it has much more than that. Now the dean is in there, the registrar is in there, public affairs is in there, the legal office, SJA, is in there, computer services are in there, as you know. And just outside it, to its immediate south, is the second statue to grace this base. And that is, of course, the statue gifted to us by the class of 1963, and that is the memorial to Alexander Hamilton. Welcome to the Henriques Room. You remember that name because, of course, John Henriques was the first CO of, was the CO of the Dobbin when it was used as a training ship. Therefore, he is called the first superintendent of the academy. This is a good shot of the Henriques Room. Very, very early, apparently, in its construction. Hamilton is finished in 32, and the painting of the walls begins, preparation for the painting begins in 1934. So this painting was taken somewhere between 32 and 34. It is a library. Okay, this is taken from the back northwest corner. You can see the books, and you can see the desks, and you can see the plain walls. Here we see a photograph of the Henriques Room from more or less the same spot as the previous slide, but here we see the paintings having been completed, which places this sometime between 1937, when the paintings were completed, and the early 1970s, when White Hall was built as the new library. By this time also, as I'll show you in a few seconds, the Henriques Room will be expanded as the academy is growing. But again, before White is built. On the back wall, you can see the so-called mural 13 and 14, which completes the Coast Guard history at the time. This was part of what was called TRAP. The Treasury Relief Art Project. It was part of a Depression-era stimulus plan. Most of you know something about the Great Depression and the fact that the U.S. government spent millions and millions and millions of dollars hiring people to do work. That might sound strange to all of you. It might not sound strange to any of you, depending on how you look at the government and the economy right now. The big three, Hamilton, Chase. Here we see a photograph of the Henriques Room from more or less the same spot as the previous slide, but here we see the paintings having been completed, which places this sometime between 1937, when the paintings were completed, and the early 1970s, when White Hall was built as the new library. By this time also, as I'll show you in a few seconds, the Henriques Room will be expanded as the academy is growing. But again, before White is built. On the back wall, you can see the so-called mural 13 and 14, which completes the Coast Guard history at the time. This was part of what was called TRAP. The Treasury Relief Art Project. It was part of a Depression-era stimulus plan. Most of you know something about the Great Depression and the fact that the U.S. government spent millions and millions and millions of dollars hiring people to do work. That might sound strange to all of you. It might not sound strange to any of you, depending on how you look at the government and the economy right now. The big three, Hamilton, Chase, Satterlee Halls, the so-called gymnasium, which is now Billard Hall, the engineering building, which is now McAllister Hall, Yeaton Hall, all of those, the core, the original buildings at the academy, were part of WPA Depression-era projects. I mentioned that earlier. So while the building of buildings for the federal government was one form of project, The decorating was another form of project where artists from all over the country were hired to paint various scenes depicting history, depicting the local culture, etc., for federal buildings. Those of you who are familiar with New London, if you go down to the New London Post Office, you'll see murals on the walls depicting whaling, since New London was a big whaling city. Aldous Brown II was selected to paint the murals in the Henriques Room and was given simple directions, and that is famous scenes from Coast Guard history to inspire cadets. That's basically what he was told. He did a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of interviewing before he started his project. Next slide, please. So the project itself lasted from 1935 to 1937, and has led to another project. Okay, so the Henriques Room is really two projects in one. The original paintings were a snapshot of Coast Guard history. They ended, the very last painting was dated about the event, the Cayuga at the Spanish Civil War, was dated about 1935, that event. But the depictions are very narrow, right? They are views of the United States Coast Guard. They ended at 1935. They're designed for a certain audience. Remember that the Academy was all male. Remember that the Academy was all white, be those instructors or be those staff or be those the cadets. Okay? So recently the room has come under a lot of scrutiny for what it depicts. Several scenes are rather oppressive. Several scenes show people of color. Several scenes show Native Americans, Native Alaskans, and also what they don't show. Right? Where are the scores and scores of women lifesavers who ran the lighthouses? Okay, where are the African Americans who ran the life-saving operations? There's a lot missed that doesn't really speak to our current audience, our current country, and our current cadet corps. So there's a task force operating right now to figure out what to do with those murals and what to do about what those murals don't show. Do we create a new set of murals? Do we paint murals elsewhere depicting other people and other activities and other famous events? Do we take them off the walls, which is almost impossible? Do we cover them with some sort of computer dimension? Lots going on to not change the past, not rewrite the past, but look more carefully at the past and highlight a different part of the past. In 1935 to 1937, these murals highlighted a certain element. Now it's time to look at other things. End of slide. Greetings. Okay, we are behind Hamilton Hall, between Hamilton Hall and McAllister Hall. That road is Campbell Hall. We saw it earlier. It intersected with Tampa on the south side of the base. Campbell was also a World War I escort and really distinguished itself in World War II as a submarine hunter. But most people don't think of the Campbell as a warship. They think of the Campbell because of its mascot, Sinbad, the dog, who lived aboard. So we'll continue north on Campbell. We'll go past Chase Hall, past Michael Hall, the clinic, until the road intersects with Harriet Lane Road, or Harriet Lane Boulevard, or Harriet Lane Avenue, whatever it's called. It's not actually Harriet Lane, unless you want to call it Harriet Lane Lane. Okay, Harriet Lane was a woman of significance to the Revenue Cutter Service. Harriet Lane was the hostess of the White House for President James Buchanan in the 1850s. President Buchanan was our bachelor president. It's pretty clear from research that he was gay. He was our only bachelor president, and so he didn't have a White House hostess. He didn't have a wife, first lady, to run the White House. So Harriet Lane, his niece, moved into the White House, and she became the hostess. And she was very fond of the Revenue Cutter Service, the purpose of the Revenue Cutter Service, the missions of the Revenue Cutter Service. They became so close, the organization, its leadership, and Miss Lane, that when the first set of cutting-edge cutters was built, dual propulsion, steam and wind, in the 1850s, the first one was named for her, Harriet Lane. If we go back to the Henriques Room, you'll see a painting depicting the ship Harriet Lane, because the Harriet Lane will be on blockade duty outside Charleston in 1861, and it is the Harriet Lane that fires the first maritime shot of the Civil War. Harriet Lane is the longest road at the Academy. It begins on the south side up by the Merle Smith Dining Hall. Old-timers used to call that the Officers Club or the Consolidated Club. It is named for Merle Smith, Commander Merle Smith, the first African-American graduate of the Coast Guard Academy. He graduated in 1966, standout on the football team, went to Viet Nam, did 2 tours in Vietnam, decorated there for heroism, stayed in the Coast Guard a little bit longer, eventually got out, became a lawyer, started his own law firm, and I've had the pleasure of knowing him and working with him. He actually worked he taught as a lawyer in the humanities department while I have been here. So the Merle Smith Dining Hall up on the south side is where Harriet Lane begins. It runs down past Billard Hall, past Cadet Memorial Field, past Leamy Hall, and then heads to North Base, where it eventually ends at the so-called back gate. Next slide, please. Of course, silly me. How could I forget OG? So as we're walking down Harriet Lane with Leamy to our left, no, Leamy to our right, we'll come across Bear Plaza. Bear Plaza. Here we have a statue of OG. Interesting little plaza this. It is the first statue on this base. It was followed a few years ago by the Alexander Hamilton Memorial, but OG has been here since the 70s or whatever, I can't even remember. Remember that OG first arrived with Cadet Stephen Evans in 1926. We have had, it's actually discussed how many OGs we have had. 26, I think, is the actual number. Our last OG left here in 1984. Just to give you a sense of how that may be recent to us. To you, it seems like ancient world, but it's very recent to us that the current Dean of Academics, Dr. Kurt Colella, the current Dean of Academics, his roommate was the last bear keeper. Cadet division was assigned the bear, and they had to feed him and take care of him and play with him and clip his nails and give him a bath and all these other sorts of things. OG spent a lot of time in the barracks, but actually lived outside. You may remember a few seconds ago I talked about Billard Hall. Those of you who know something about the back of Billard or the tennis courts, there you will see the smallest building on base. That is Irwin Hall, the observatory. It's no longer a functioning observatory. Okay? When you go into Dimick, you will see a telescope in Dimick. That is the telescope from Irwin Hall. There's a walkway around Irwin Hall, a concrete walkway, and OG lived in a cage bolted to that walkway. By the 1980s, a number of near catastrophes have occurred with OG's objectionable presence. As you know, OG would eat things, pee on things, attack things, do all kinds of inappropriate activities at inappropriate times. By then, the state laws had changed as well, and it no longer became allowable to hold a wild animal like a bear as a mascot. So the last OG was retired to a national park, and actually cadets, as recently as 10 years ago, went and visited the last OG. Most OGs were female.
20, I think 21 of them are female, simply because the females were smaller. As I like to say, somebody had the bright idea that a 400-pound killing machine is so much better to have around than an 800-pound killing machine. This is Bear Plaza. I usually call it Evans Plaza, and I'm the only one who calls it that, okay? Because there's an interesting synergy here. Because if you look behind the bear, you will see the inscription on the wall for the Corps of Cadets. That beautiful line, "Who lives here reveres honor, honors duty." That line is attributed not to Cadet Stephen Evans, but to Stephen Evans 30 years later when he is superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy. So this area is tied together by Stephen Evans. He, as a cadet, brought the bear, and he, as later on in his career as superintendent, came up with that motto for the Corps of Cadets. Next slide, please. So one of the big themes of the Academy is sort of its expansion, its evolution for various missions. The slide in front of you is the lower field, or are the lower fields. If you're out back of Leamy, right, if you had crossed Harriet Lane and gone behind Leamy, this is what you would see. Beautiful fields, many of them sponsored by and built by alumni funds, alumni donations. All of that is fill. All of that is fill. It's all been dredged from the Thames and added on to build more land. When the Academy was first built in 31-32, the train you're familiar with, the train that runs down below the Academy, that was actually on a trestle over the water. That's where the river line is. All of this was added in the 1940s and 50s. And it wasn't added so you can go down there and hit a ball. It was added because the Academy had seaplanes down there. They were on big, long ramps. And they loaded onto these ramps, and they rolled down these ramps into the river and took off from the river. This is an active base. I mean, we have a cutter down there now, as you know, the Albacore ties up here. But if there was search and rescue to be done in the Sound or search and rescue in the area, those planes would take off from the Academy. Now, by the late 1960s, early 1970s, as we'll talk about in a second, the Academy numbers begin to expand at an enormous rate. The Coast Guard will enter the Department of Transportation, and the needs of the service are about education and about training and about more officers. And so that land is converted from these seaplane ramps into athletic fields. And that will take us to the next part of this slideshow, looking at how the Academy adapts and changes when it leaves Treasury and enters the new Department of Transportation in 1967. Hello again, everybody. Dr. Zuczek here, beginning yet another chunk of this slideshow, and one that's probably most remarkable for some of the old-timers here. When I joined the Coast Guard, the Academy, it was Department of Transportation, as you'll find with a lot of the old-timers. Sometimes we forget that it wasn't always Department of Transportation. For 180 years, since more or less 1790, the Revenue Cutter Service, most of its ancestor entities, and the Coast Guard was in the Department of the Treasury. In the mid-1960s, that changed. Okay, rise in environmental concerns and conservation, rising issues of migration, drugs coming from Asia and from Central and South America, and a lot of other things that didn't involve the Coast Guard, but a lot of stuff going on. Congress and the President decided to create a new executive department, and that would be a Department of Transportation. That was signed into law in 65, put together in 66, actually hit the ground in 67, and that's when the United States Coast Guard shifted over to the Department of Transportation. A lot of what you know about the Coast Guard starts here. Right? Before the Department of Transportation, there were no Coast Guard uniforms. Coast Guard wore the same uniforms as the Navy. The Coast Guard motto, the Semper Paratus, a lot of the cool stuff you think of now actually started with the Department of Transportation. And the most famous emblem is, of course, the racing stripe, right? The canted 64-degree color scheme that has become a color scheme across the world for Coast Guards. Well, I shouldn't say a color scheme. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's orange. But that idea of that sort of canted line across the hull is used by Coast Guards all over the world. Right? We also see an increase in missions, right? A lot more drug interdiction, a lot more migrant interdiction, significant focus on environmental care. So the Academy has to respond. The Academy does respond. Between about 1962-63 and about 1975, the Academy's space doubles and the size of the Corps doubles. For the first time in the 1970s, the Corps will actually reach 1,000 cadets. We add new majors. This is when government comes online. This is when management comes online. Chemistry as a major came online. We even had nuclear engineering for a little while. We need new buildings. We need new annexes to chase. We need more space. And that's what we're going to see. Okay? A lot of what we call the north part of the base comes because of this expansion. Next slide.
Most of the Department of Transportation expansion occurred on the north side of the base. The one notable exception is the building of Overland Hall, the new sports complex, which was built in the early 1970s, partially because of the DOT expansion, partially because there was expectation that the Corps would be growing with the admission of women. It was just a matter of time before that happened, and certainly physical education and sports needed more room. Most of the expansion occurred on the north side of the base. Munro Hall was built as a new servicing center and for personnel rooms. Smith, named after Edward Smith, was a science building. Dimmock, named after a man called the Dean, Chester Dimmock, who taught in the math department for almost 4 decades. And Weishe Hall. Weishe Hall is, of course, where the library, admissions, and the museum are. Weishe Hall, named after Russell Weishe, the commandant of the Coast Guard during the Second World War. You all know who Douglas Munro is, of course. I expect you to. This is the only building named for an enlisted person on this base. And if you have your back at Douglas Munro, you look up Hunter Liggett Road. You call it, of course, Library Hill. Hunter Liggett was a Navy Coast Guard ship that served in World War II as a logistics tender. It served at Guadalcanal. Who else served at Guadalcanal and died at Guadalcanal? Of course, Douglas Munro. So that's why the Hunter Liggett Road leads right into Munro Hall. The center picture there, you see a couple of dudes hanging out. It's probably about 1970, 71, breaking ground for Weishe Hall. And on the right is the science building, Smith Hall, named after Edward Smith. Iceberg was his nickname, the first Coast Guardsman to earn a PhD. He was a world-renowned oceanographer and ice expert, one of the first people to track and explain the creation of icebergs. Actually took 2 flights over the North Pole in the Graf Zeppelin with the German scientists and some other dudes, mapping the ice sheets of the North Pole. Fascinating character. Carry on.
So we're walking up Hunter Liggett, what you would call Library Hill. Smith Hall's on our right. We come up to what is called Q Lot. And just past Q Lot, there is a small plaza called Berthoff Plaza. Okay, it sits between Dimmock and Chase Hall. Berthoff Plaza is a memorial to the Coast Guard in World War II. Some smarty pants listening to this is going to say, all right, why is it called Berthoff Plaza? It's about World War II. Great question. Yeah, I don't know. considering Ellsworth Berthoff in many ways created the legislation to form the Coast Guard in 1915 and became its first commandant, there's nothing on this base about Ellsworth Berthoff. Nothing obvious, nothing big. So we give him a plaza. But there's nothing at the plaza about Ellsworth Berthoff. It's a nice place to hang around to get a sense of the impact the United States Coast Guard had on the Second World War. Okay, everything from search and rescue to Coast Guard operations on D-Day to issues of anti-submarine warfare. And the plaque you see on the right is the plaque to the Greenland Patrol, one of the most sort of mysterious, unknown, understudied topics in World War II. Greenland, as you know, okay, the island of Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, it is not a country, belongs to the King of Denmark. Greenland is a perfect place to predict weather for the European continent. And it's a perfect place to control North Atlantic sea lanes. So in 1938, 1939, the Germans began operating out of Greenland. And after their airborne assaults on Britain in 1940 and the taking of France in the spring of 1940, they actually started building submarine pens and putting weather stations on Greenland so that they could predict the weather on the continent. Even before the United States is involved in the war, the United States is worried about Greenland. And Prime Minister Winston Churchill of England cuts a deal with his very good friend, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States, and the United States takes action against the Germans in Greenland, even though we're not at war yet. So we use the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard found, equipped, trained, and then sent to Greenland a crack group of sort of Coast Guard commandos. They snuck into Greenland. They seized 2 German ships, the first seizures of the war, found the German meteorological stations, seized them, and took the Germans prisoner and ended up handing them over to the Brits. So some of the very first American activities, even before we're in the war, are occurring in the North Atlantic, and it's Coast Guardsmen who are doing the work. Next slide. Okay, this one is very important for lots of different reasons. As you leave Chase Hall heading north, heading toward Dimmock or heading toward Smith, you're going down what's called Q Lot. And you will see 3 sets of stone stairs. And there's a lot of myth, and there's a lot of stories, and there's a lot of different rumor about what those stairs are. No, they're not the ruins of some ancient civilization. Those are the steps to people's houses. And this is important to remember. When the Coast Guard landed here in 1931, 1932, it was with the blessings of New London. When it expanded, first in the 1950s, some of that was done through money, some of that was done through connections, but it was largely collaborative. The Department of Transportation expansion in the 1970s is not a friendly one. The United States Coast Guard Academy needed land, and New London didn't really want to give it up. And so the United States Coast Guard Academy and the Department of Transportation began using eminent domain and a legal maneuver called declaration of taking to purchase land. You couldn't turn down the purchase, and I have gone through those records, and I can tell you that the purchases were made at about 150% market value. But still, people were driven out of their homes, people lost their houses, people had to move because we wanted land. Those steps are the steps to people's houses. You have to understand this. You live in New London. We have to be good neighbors. We have to be part of this community. And there are people here with long memories. In the 1970s was not that long ago. Every couple of years, we try to expand to the only place we can, and that is behind the lower tennis practice courts, an area called Riverside Park, We have offered a lot of money for that land. And New London has held referendums on it. And every time we lose, and we can't get that land. People have memories. We are the 800-pound gorilla. We can be a bully. And we have to remember that we are guests here. We are public servants. And we have to be sensitive and understanding of the history and the feelings of the people we operate with and the people we serve. Next slide. Okay, here we are, pretty much done. For me, it was a Department of Transportation Academy. For you, it's a Department of Homeland Security Academy. As you know, following the tragic events of 9/11, the United States government created a new executive agency, the Department of Homeland Security. And the United States Coast Guard moved completely, entirely into that new department. Once again, we had to change. We flexed. There are new challenges. There are new threats. There are, shifting missions. Just to give you a little smattering of it, there's a couple of pictures in front of you there. On the left is the Cyber Lab. Our newest major in well over a decade is the Cyber Systems Major. That's the Cyber Lab in McAllister Hall. To its right is the Radom Satellite Monitoring, whatever system that sits atop Smith Hall. It's for microsats. It's pretty cool, although I really expect a giant golf club to come swinging out of the sky and launch that thing one of these days. But the Coast Guard is not just into guarding coast. We are into satellite imagery. We are into GPS and GIS. Coast Guard operates all over the world, and that might be sort of a good metaphor for that. And then in the lower center is First Class Marshal Rayburn, a graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy, government major. That's the cover from the alumni bulletin from last year. Within the Department of Humanities, we have CASP, the Center for Arctic Study and Policy. Again, this is not a new mission. The United States Coast Guard Revenue Cutter Service has been operating in the Arctic forever, but it has taken on different security and environmental elements in the last 10, 15 years. The Coast Guard is a key player in the Arctic. The United States is one of the few Arctic nations that actually has property in the Arctic. And so the United States Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard Academy, is very, very involved in Arctic policy and in Arctic strategy. He's not in the Arctic. I guess that's kind of ironic. Operation Deep Freeze, National Science Foundation, Air Force, Navy operation, takes place in the Antarctic every year. And they had a couple of extra beds. So the director of CASP, Ms. Clara Condit, and I said, hey, anybody want to go? What cadet wants to spend Christmas down the Antarctic? And a lot of people wanted to go. So we picked Marshall because he'd been studying the Antarctic for a while. He's into polar stuff, or at least he was. So we said, fine, and we shipped him down on a ship, and he spent some time down in the Antarctic. The times, they are changing. Next slide, please. This largely concludes the history of the United States Coast Guard Academy as part of your Coast Guard history session. I titled the slide The Way Forward, even though it's a history lesson, right? But that's how I want you to think. Think about the people who came before you. Think about what the Coast Guard has achieved, what its members have achieved, how they have adapted, how they have been flexible, thoughtful, wise, ingenious, creative in the face of every possible challenge, disaster, or demand. The life you've chosen is not for everybody. Most people do not go into the military. Of those who go into the military, very few people go to an academy. Most Americans your age don't even go to college. You are a fine point on a sliver edge of another fine point. What you have chosen to do is remarkable. The life you've chosen to lead is admirable. We are here because of you. We are not doing any of those missions right now. Our mission is you. Our mission is preparing you, educating you, developing you, mentoring you. Help us do that. Help us create the next generation of Coast Guard leaders. Thank you for listening, and thanks to the incredible group that helped put this course together. Zuczek, out.